Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and look at, we've done histograms, we've done box plots, so now we're going to look at how to do them on the calculator. So right here you have directions if you have the TI-83 or 84 on how to do it. This is for the TI-89. Anything else, you're probably going to need to look in an actual book that describes on how to do this for your calculator, but I highly recommend, again, having these kind just because it's very standard. Most people have them, most people can use them. We check them out at our library, so that's an option for you. So I'm going to go ahead and go to our document camera here, and we're going to go ahead and look at our graphing calculator. So this is my graphing calculator, so hopefully you can see this. Hi! And we're going to go ahead and talk about how to do this on there. So earlier I have said that one of the number one buttons that you're going to use on your calculator is the stat button. So right here we're going to press the stat button. We're going to go ahead and edit a list. So I'm going to go ahead and hit edit, and I'm going to go ahead and enter in my data into my list. So I'm going to go ahead and pause the video for right now while I enter that in. You could pause yours and enter yours in your calculator so you can kind of see how this is done and work with it. Work with me on this at the same time. Okay, so we're back now, and I've entered in everything into my list. And just a way to kind of double check here, if you can see how it says L1 parentheses 50, that tells me that this 2.7 is my 50th piece of data, which falls in line with our information. We have a percentage for each state listed below. And so now we're looking at 50 states. So this is the data for each state listed in there. And so what we're going to go ahead and do now is we're going to go ahead, and we've talked about how to calculate your one variable stats, but we're going to go ahead and we're going to make that histogram. So for any graph you need, you're going to do what we call a stat plot, a statistics plot. And so that is right up here. And since it's in blue, that means we have to hit the blue button, which is second, and go to stat plot, and that gives us our stat plot option. Now we can do several different plots. We're going to go ahead and do plot 1. So we're going to hit enter on plot 1, and we're going to turn it on. So we make sure that we hit enter to highlight on, and then we can go down. Now down here we have different types of graphs available. This first one is our scatter plot. This next one I think is a line plot. Here's our histogram. And then if I keep arrowing over, we get a modified box plot. And this one will automatically calculate for your outliers and give you the dots for outliers. And then we have our box plot. And then we have, I think this is a cumulative frequency plot, but I'm not entirely sure. No, I have to come back to this one. I think this one is our, we use when we start doing z-scores in chapter 2. So, and so I picked the correct one I want. Oops, I arrowed up, which took me out of that. So I'm going to arrow down, and then the only thing I can do is across, right and left. So I'm going to go over, I'm going to hit enter, we're going to do our histogram. And all my data for my histogram is in list 1. I'm not going to have a frequency, so I'm going to go ahead and delete that. And then I'm going to go ahead and hit graph. And I hit graph and nothing shows up. So anytime you're doing a stat plot and you need it to automatically just kind of find where you are, go ahead and hit zoom 9. It automatically just kind of zeroes in on things. And then what we can do is we can kind of figure out, well, I don't know my bin widths, I don't know anything here. So if you hit trace, it takes me to the top, and it tells me my minimum value is 1.2. So it goes from 1.2 to 4.914, and there are 20 numbers in that bin. And then I can arrow over, and then my minimum value is 4.91. My max value is anything up to 8.628, and there are 11 numbers in there. And so this gives me my information. Now those numbers aren't very user-friendly numbers. So now that I've kind of gotten a look at that, I can actually set my own window. So if I go into my window, my minimum X value, I might want to go ahead and start at 0. And then my highest value is somewhere around 30. So I could go ahead and go by 30. And then my scale tells me my bin width. So if I want my bin width to be 5, I'm going to go by 5s. My Y minimum, I'm going to go ahead and set it 0 because I can't really have negative values for my bars. And then my Y max is what I think at least the highest bar is going to be. I'm going to go ahead and just go for 20 and we'll see how this goes. So I'm going to go ahead and hit graph. And if I hit trace, so this tells me my minimum value is 0. It goes to 5. So it's a 0 to 5 bin width. And there's 20 values in there. And I arrow over. This is from 5 to 10. And there are 13 numbers in there. And it allows us to really see that progression. So Zoom 9 is nice to help you get you where you need. But you go into window and you could set that minimum, the maximum, and then that X scale allows us to set that bin width. So from 0, we go by every 5 for the bin width. And then it makes it so much nicer for you to go ahead and graph on your own. Because even though you do a graph on the calculator, if they ask you to graph it, you still have to mimic that on your paper. So you're still tracing that, redrawing that on your paper. Because it's not like they can actually see your calculator on a test. No one's going to go through and take a picture of everyone's calculator to make sure they graphed it right. You have to be able to redraw that on your paper. And so that's our histogram. So when we look, when we look back at our paper here, we now have that spot to be able to do that histogram. So we're going to go ahead and redraw the histogram over here. So we started at 0. We went by 5s. Up to 30. And this is representing percent. Born outside US. And then here's our frequency. And then there's no way I have enough 20 dots, so I'm going to go ahead and go maybe by 2s. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14. Nope, we won't have enough to hit 20, so maybe by 4s. 4, 8, 12, 16, 20. And so then we can draw our bars. So our first bar would go to 20. And then I'm arrowing over. And my next bar goes to 13. Then I draw 13. And then I arrow over. And the next one goes to 9. And then I arrow over. The next bar goes to 5. And I arrow over. The next one goes to 2. And then I arrow over. And the last one is 1. And so there we have the graph on the calculator. We put it on our paper. And then we can describe our distribution. Classic right-handed or right-skewed distribution. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and look at our box plots. And again, we're going to do that modified box plot, so it automatically does our outliers for us. So TI-83, 84 directions, TI-89 directions, some kind of like sneak peeks there. These directions are also in your textbook, so you can also look them up if you're finding that it's just a little hard for your eyes to read those. So that's an option. So we're going to go ahead and look at our calculator with, here we go. So there was our histogram. And we're going to go ahead now and do a box plot. So I'm going to go into my stat. We're going to go into edit, and we're going to fix our list. Now I can leave this list here because maybe I want to do something again with it later. And I can go into list 2 and use list 2 for this one. And in fact, I'm going to go ahead and do that. So that way you can see how that works. Now, this is nice on the TI-84 because they tell you where is your list. They're always giving you prompts. But if you have an 83, you have to remember to put in that, no, now I'm using list 2. So if you're using an 83, you may want to just stick with list 1. That just kind of keeps you safe. Because other words, if you don't prompt your calculator to use a different list, it's automatically going to use list 1 every single time. And so you'll get bogus data if you're not careful. So I'm going to go ahead and use list 2 to kind of show you how that works. So I'm going to go ahead and enter in my data for travel times. So 5, 10, 10, 10. See, there's 4 10s, and then 12, 15, 20, 20, 25, 30, 30, 40, 40, and 60. Nice, they put it in order for us. And that's nice because if you wanted to do it by hand, it's so much easier when it's in order. So now what we're going to do is we're going to graph it. So I have to go second, and then we do that stat plot button. And I'm going to go ahead and do plot 1 again. And this time I'm going to change it. I don't want the histogram, so I'm going to arrow over and I'm going to go to that modified box plot. I'm going to hit enter and select it. Now remember, my stuff wasn't in list 1. Our stuff was in list 2. So I'm going to go ahead and put in list 2 here. I'm going to go ahead. We don't want a frequency. It's something we'll talk about later. And then we're going to go ahead and, or maybe I am going to put in a frequency because it won't let me just delete it. And then we're going to go ahead and put in whatever type of mark you want. You could put in the X, the box. I like using the box because it's just easier for my old eyes to see. But you could do the plus or you could do the dot. The dots are a little bit harder to see, so I don't recommend it. I'd stay with the plus or the box. So I'm going to go ahead and do the box, and I'm going to hit graph. Now it doesn't look like I have a full graph there, so I'm going to go ahead and hit zoom 9, that special one that we see, and look. It looks lovely. We've got it totally on there. And does it look like there's any outliers? Nope, there's no dots on the ends, so there are no outliers in this set of data. So now, just like our last one, we can hit the button trace, and it'll actually tell us what our values are. My min value is 5. I arrow over. My first quartile is 10. My median's 20. My third quartile is 30. And our max is 60. And so then we can just go to our graph up here, and we can just translate that information over here. So probably going by 5s for our scale. So 5, 10, 15, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60. And then again, always remembering to label what do these numbers mean. This is minutes. To travel to work. Probably could have worded that a little bit better, but we get the idea. And then we're going ahead and we're going to start with that minimum value of 5. Put a dot there. Go over to our first quartile, what's at 10. Go to our median, which is at 20. Go to our third quartile, which is at 30. Really nice symmetrical box there. And then go out to our maximum, which is 60. Almost looks like it could be an outlier, but again, we did a modified box plot, so it already tested for us. And now that we have it graphed, we can go ahead and talk about the shape of the graph. Now, like I said, this box is pretty symmetrical. Both sides of the box are really nice and even. But when we look at those whiskers, because this is also known as a box and whisker plot, when we're looking at these whiskers out here, this is really tiny. So there's a lot of values right in there. But this is really long, which tells me that that's the tail. It's really spread out, which means this is a right skewed distribution. So in class, I'm going to be having you practice the graphs. I'm going to ask you to tell me now from your graph, What is your 5-number summary? Are there any outliers? What are the outliers? And so we're going to be practicing that. So make sure you have your calculator with you, and we'll keep practicing it, because the more you do it, the more you remember how to do it.